Welcome to Giants Latest. We know that the 2025 NFL draft class has a plethora of really good running backs, but is that a position that the Giants need to draft this year? Now, we're lucky in the fact that the Giants have quite a few draft picks this year compared to last year. Last year, they only had 6. This year, I believe that they have 9. So they're in a great position to bring in, hopefully, a lot of talent to help fill out this roster and to bring some depth. Now, there are a lot of positions on the Giants' current roster that are missing depth, but I actually think that running back might not be one of them. So let's talk about the 4 running backs that are currently on the team and see if that's a position that they need to update this offseason. So number 1, we know they have running back Devin Singletary, who's a veteran, came from the Bills. The Giants brought him in last year, signed him to a multi-year deal. He is pretty much the only veteran in the room, so I expect him to stay and think that for what he is, he's a pretty good back, and I think that the Giants will likely end up keeping him. Next up, we have Eric Gray, who the Giants drafted a few years ago, and who hasn't really done all that much for the Giants, but because he's a Joe Schoen draft pick, I don't expect him to go anywhere, but I do expect him to probably be the 3rd string running back. They used him a bit on special teams, which was a disaster, and I hope that that's something that we never see them do again. Next up, we have Tyrone Tracy Jr., who they brought in last year during the draft, who has been great so far. He had an excellent rookie season, over 1,000 scrimmage yards, and the new running back coach that the Giants brought in actually was Tyrone Tracy's former running back coach at Iowa. So obviously Tyrone Tracy is going nowhere. He is the future at the running back position for the Giants, and hoping that he can have another great year this year. Now there's one more running back that the Giants have on the roster. Dante Miller was an undrafted free agent from the University of South Carolina, where I went to school. I'm a big fan of Dante Miller, and he actually is someone who can be used on special teams. So I'm curious to see what the Giants are able to do with him this year. He is extremely fast, and I think that they could and should be using his speed to their advantage. So with that being said, we know they have 4 running backs on the roster. Is this a position that they should consider drafting? Now, I think we all agree that there's no such thing as too much depth. The question is it worth taking up another roster spot when there are some other spots on the roster that so desperately need help? So I think that depending on how the draft goes, they should consider it, especially if there's a running back that is the best player available at a certain point in the draft. In my opinion, I would wait until probably round 4 or later to think about bringing in a running back, as the first 3 rounds, they need to bring in impact players in very specific positions. So I'm on board with they draft a running back, but like I said, it has to be later in the draft. I think that would be the better move. Joe Schoen is at the Combine, and he spoke to the media and gave away a little bit of who he likes in this draft class. Now, he said that they have done extensive research on Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders, obviously knowing that they have the 3rd overall pick. He was specifically asked about Cam Ward, and he actually gave us a bit of information about how he really feels about him. So Joe Schoen was at the Cal game where Cam Ward had a tough start to the game. He actually ended up digging them into a hole, and was one of the reasons why Miami was losing during a portion of that game. Now, what Joe Schoen also talked about was the fact what he really liked about Cam Ward was that in the second half of the game, he was able to turn it around. And he is the reason why Miami ended up beating Cal. So he talked about the adversity aspect and the fact that he really liked that Cam Ward, after getting him and the team through a rough start, he was able to turn it around and ending on a high note with a win. So we don't hear a lot about Joe Schoen when it comes to things like this. He talks about specific qualities that he's looking for in players, especially the running back position. But to hear him give a really specific example about Cam Ward and talked about, that he really liked that about his game and his personality and how he was able to stay, calm, cool, and collected under pressure, to me says a lot about what Joe Schoen really feels about Cam Ward. Now, I really like Cam Ward. The Giants could get him at 3. I think they're in a great spot. So let's see how the Giants end up doing during this draft. But like I said, I'm really on board with Cam Ward, and it sounds like the Giants GM, Joe Schoen, just might be too. Moving over to the combine, let's talk about the schedule because for those of you who are watching or interested in the combine, basically what they do is they have different position groups each day. So Thursday is going to be defensive linemen and a linebackers, two positions that the Giants are, of course, in need of. We know that this is a really heavy defensive line and defensive tackle draft class. So I think if you're interested at all in watching the combine, I would say the DL is probably a position that you want to pay attention to. So if you have any time on Thursday, make sure you check it out on NFL Network. On Friday, defensive backs and tight ends. Now, obviously, the Giants also need defensive backs. They need a lot of things. So if you're a Giants fan and you have the opportunity, I would say to try and get in front of the combine as much as you can. It's going to give some insightful information. The one thing, when we talk about the quarterbacks is that Shedeur Sanders and Cam Ward are likely both not to throw. So it sounds like they'll be focused on the interviews only, but some of the other players, especially in other positions, will be doing everything. And I think that will be very insightful when it comes to each team. When it comes to tight end, Elijah Arroyo, also from Miami, is not participating, but he is a guy that has been talked about very highly when it comes to the tight end class. So we'll see if we get any good insight coming out of him. Next up on Saturday is quarterback, wide receiver, and running back. Again, like we talked about, these are all positions of need for the Giants. Not so much running back, but I think being able to see the speed on these guys when we're looking at the quarterbacks, obviously they have not thrown with the wide receivers that they will be throwing the ball to. So things like watching for anticipation, ball strength, things like that are going to be really interesting to see how that goes for the quarterbacks. The second tier of quarterbacks, so Jalen Milroe, Jackson Dart, Will Howard and some of the other quarterbacks will be throwing, so you will be able to watch those guys, which will be interesting. And last up, Sunday, if you're a Giants fan, probably the most important and most exciting position is the offensive line. Now, it sounds quite boring if you're not a fan of the Giants, but we all know that it is a position of need for this team. They currently do not have a right guard on the roster, so the offensive lineman is a position that I will be focused on during the combine, and we'll do a recap next week for you. So if you missed it, we will talk all about the combine. But the last thing we have here on the combine is when Joe Schoen spoke to the media, he was asked about Andrew Thomas and Dexter Lawrence, who both suffered injuries and missed part of the season. So here is what Joe Schoen had to say about both of them. First up is Dexter Lawrence, who had a dislocated elbow. Dexter is good. You saw him at the Pro Bowl, so I'm assuming he's good. I haven't seen him physically, but he can play tug of war, so he's good. Next up, when talking about Andrew Thomas, he said he's been in the weight room. He looks phenomenal. No boot on his foot or anything, and he's moving well. He looks humongous right now. Now, this is Andrew Thomas's third injury, I believe, to his foot. So an issue that has come up a lot with Andrew Thomas. So something that the Giants are going to have to do this offseason is really think about bringing in a good swing tackle who is going to be able to step in and play if, God forbid, knock on wood, Andrew Thomas gets injured again. But the great news is that those two guys both are good to go. We should be seeing them this spring and this summer, and we know that they will be ready to go for week 1, which for this Giants team is an absolute must. If there's one thing we know about this Giants offense is that when Andrew Thomas goes down, they're basically unwatchable. So Andrew Thomas being healthy and ready to go is extremely important. And of course, Dexter Lawrence, one of the only Pro Bowlers on this team, the best player on the defense for the Giants, having him healthy and ready to go for week 1 is extremely important. And I am so happy that they will both be ready to go. Stay tuned for more Giants latest coming your way.